everyone. I am so glad that we are back together today to talk about something exciting, a new path that we're going to be embarking on as a staff together. Up to this point, we've talked a lot about the creation of our PLCs and our mission, vision, and goals for our district. And then last time we were together, we talked about a guaranteed and viable curriculum for all and the development of learning targets for our students and making sure that the standards were aligned with the instruction that were happening in our classroom. And this leads me to the next really exciting initiative that we're going to talk about for our school district is we are going to be talking about implementing standards-based grading. Now, I know some of you may have heard of this before. Some of you might have used it in other districts or are aware that other districts are using it, but it's really taking a look at our current grading practices and trying to determine how we move forward with the alignment of that guaranteed and viable curriculum that we have established and those learning targets that we've identified. And this is just the next logical progression of where we're going to go as a school, collectively as a staff. We're going to do this together. It's an exciting, uncharted territory for a lot of us, but I just want you to know that you are going to have the full support of your administrative staff, your instructional coaches, and your collaborative teams to work through this process, to learn together, and figure out how we're going to implement this in the future within our district. Why would we do this? Well, Robert Marzano said, why would anyone want to change current grading practices? The answer is quite simple. Grades are so imprecise that they're almost meaningless. And Robert Marzano is a researcher that has spent a lot of time going over traditional grading practices and then standards-based assessments and just really diving into the fact that what we do in terms of grading is really broken and it's not always reflective of what our students actually know and can do. So I wanted to kind of give you the why are we looking at this as we move forward. I think the idea for our district, for our instructional leaders, for our classroom teachers, the idea is how can we make sure that our grading practices are more equitable and that they represent student learning on the standards that we've identified as essential for each course. So how are they equitable and how do they actually represent our student learning based on the standards we've identified? Why do we need to make changes to our grading practices? We have some really important improvements to make. We want to make sure grades are accurate. We want to make sure they're meaningful. We want to make sure they're consistent. And we want them to support learning. We want all four of those things in place when we're talking about our current grading practices. We want them to represent academic factors. So often we have things involved in our grading that have nothing to do with what students actually know and can do. Can include things like absences, tardies, behavior, things that are still needing to be addressed in school, but they don't necessarily need to be addressed in an academic assessment of our students. And so how do we separate those two things out so our grades are truly reflective of academic factors? We must provide students with a sense of hope and encourage them to take charge of their own learning. We talked about that when we were doing our learning targets in our guaranteed and viable curriculum. We want students to have that sense of value within their own education, and making the learning targets identifiable and understandable to our students is important. And then also our assessment practices must do the same thing. We don't want students coming to school that feel like there's no hope to pass a class. We've all had those students that have missed a great deal of school for whatever reasons, but then they get back on track and they're trying to work towards the finish line, but yet they've dug themselves such a hole with so many zeros in the grade book that it's statistically impossible for them to pass the class. We don't want to do that to our students. We want to make our grading system equitable and achievable for all students, regardless of where they're at. So why would we talk about moving to standards-based grading? I know it can be very difficult for some people to wrap their brains around saying we're going to take away the traditional model that we've all known, that we've all used as students ourselves and as teachers. Why are we going to get rid of that and start with something new? So what is standards-based grading? In the traditional grading system, the performance is certified through like a accrual of points, often put into percentages, which include assignments that are maybe sometimes the first attempts that our students are giving at learning. So take a math class, for example. We're learning a new concept. And we are going to include all the points that the students have earned over the course of the quarter, even sometimes that very beginning period where they're not necessarily understanding the content or able to demonstrate their learning effectively, which might result in low points. We're putting that all together. And so the essential question in a regular grading model is, how many points do I have? Not, what have I learned? A standards-based grading model it's certifying the demonstration of the student's performance on that standard at the end of the grading period. So how can the student perform based on that standard by the end of a period? The essential question in a standards-based grading system is, to what degree has the student demonstrated the necessary knowledge or skill as described in a standard? Now let's take an athletic example. If we have a student that's running track and they spent the entire season practicing for the 400-meter hurdles, their first time score is probably the highest time that they have throughout the season, and they're working throughout the time to shave that time down. At the end, when they're going into sectionals, do we give them a seed time of an average of all of the points or all of their times throughout the season? No, we give them their best time that they were able to demonstrate. Standards-based grading is essentially doing the same thing, as we're allowing those students multiple opportunities to showcase their knowledge based on a certain standard, and then we're giving them the best score that they've been able to achieve throughout the grading period or term, semester, etc. So what's going to be the same and what's going to be different? I know a lot of times people are extremely hesitant when we talk about a change, and people that maybe have worked with standards-based grading before, or people that have heard about it before. I know that there's going to be some hesitation and some trepidation. So here's what I'm going to say to you. What's the same? We're still going to use PowerSchool, our student management system. Students are still going to get a report card with letter grades at the end of the semester. We know that letter grades are important for things like GPAs, college applications, transcripts. We can't get rid of them completely, but we'll have a conversion of how we take the standards-based assessment and put it into a letter grade. There's still going to be an honor roll in GPA, so our students that have worked really hard and demonstrated high levels of knowledge are still going to be recognized. But what's going to look different? Our students are going to see essential standards in PowerSchool instead of points listed for each assignment. Students will receive a 1 to a 4 for each standard as the grading period progresses along. Grades are going to represent how students are doing based on the academic standards. And then we're going to do something called a Spartan grade. We're going to pull all that non-academic behavior out that represents things like responsibility, attendance, behavior, completion, etc. Those are still going to be represented, but not in the same way as they have up to this point. So what do these numbers look like? I talked about we're going to have a grading scale, and I feel like it's really important to be transparent with all of you what this is going to look like. And so we can kind of work through your concerns or your questions, but I figure the more you know, the more you understand on the front end, the better equipped we're going to be able to work through some of those concerns or hesitations. So we're going to do on a 1 through 4 scale. 1 meaning the student minimally meets grade level expectations, 2 meaning they partially meet it, 3 meaning they meet the grade level expectations, and 4 is they exceed it. So 1 through 4 is the scale that we're going to be using. And remember, these scores are going to be tied to the academic standards that your PLCs have deemed essential for each course. This is something called a proficiency table. This is something that we're going to be using with our students. We're going to talk about that further in the future, but I just wanted to give you an example of, a lot of us use rubrics. A lot of us use answer keys. So now we're going to use what's called proficiency tables. And a proficiency table is a clear-cut understanding of, number 1, what the course is right here, the essential standards that we've identified for our specific course, the learning targets that we've put in place through our PLCs, and then what does a 4, 3, 2, 1 go? And we'll give specific descriptions to the students and families and teachers so everybody's on the same page of what does a 3 look like? What does a 2 look like? What does a 4 look like? Always going back to how does it tie to that standard that we've identified. So how are teachers going to be supported? I keep recognizing that there's going to be a lot of concern. There's maybe some hesitation, some fear, some unknowns going forward. So how are we as your educational leaders, how are we going to support you through this process? Just remember, we're going to continue to work with the PLCs. You've already identified your essential standards. You've already identified your learning targets. We're just going to take that to the next level, and we're going to work on some proficiency tables where we're able to put those things in place of what does a 3 look like, tied to this learning target, and this essential standard. Our instructional coaches are going to be here to support you during conference periods. You're going to be given some additional research, some support, some readings. Everyone's going to be getting this really awesome book called A Repair Kit for Grading, where there's 15 fixes of what we can do right now in our classrooms to ensure that our grading practices are more fair and equitable. So each teacher is going to be getting this book. We're going to be working through it together at some of our staff meetings throughout the school year and in our professional development days to come. I do have a video in here. I'm not going to show it during this presentation, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the slideshow with all of you to look at on your own time, hopefully with your PLCs. But I'm just going to let you know that this 8-minute video is a really great understanding of someone by the name of Rick Wormley. And he talks a ton about standards-based grading. He talks about the practices, why so many districts are changing to this model, why so many schools are recognizing the understanding and importance of changing into this model. So what I would like you to do is tomorrow during your PLC times, I'd like you to watch this 8-minute video together and then just jot down some key takeaways, what you were able to see, any wonderings, any questions that you still have now after watching this video that we and the instructional coaches can address. I would like you to do that during that PLC time, and then your team will work through that and meet with departments and PLCs to talk about questions or concerns that come up from that video. And like I said, essentially every group is going to be getting this book, A Repair Kit for Grading. It's going to be a wonderful resource. We're going to do some learning together. We're going to do some independent learning, but we're going to give you some support through some academic research data that can showcase not only why we are going to move to this model, but how. I know that is often one of the biggest wonderings that people have is, yep, I understand. It makes great sense in theory. How are we going to do it? This book and our time together throughout the remainder of the year is we're going to really work through the how are we going to do this shift in assessment practices. Just want to thank you all for your time again today. It's so great to get together. I look forward to our time going forward, talking about grading practices, where we're going to examine what's working, what's not, and how we make this shift as a building and as a district moving forward. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.